notorious for getting. Cool. All right. So today's conversation is going to be about reentry. And so I thought it'd be a great chance for us to do that. I know depending on where we are in the country, all the kind of things, it's going to vary. But I think it's helpful for us to start this conversation realizing today might be more questions and philosophy and thought and stuff like that versus actually practical, like I'm going to do this. Excuse me. But I think it'll be helpful to be able to start this conversation because I've seen a ton of traffic in a lot of like lead pastor worlds where they're starting to talk about this. And so I want to make sure that we are thought leaders and proactive in this so that, you know, a week from now or 2 weeks from now, if you're a lead pastor, an associate pastor, or whoever comes to you and says, hey, we've been thinking about this, you're going to be able to say, yeah, I was on a call 2 weeks ago starting this conversation to get our brains pumping. And so we're going to do that. And again, yeah, we'll do that. So the first thing I want to do just to kind of frame out this, because it hit me as I was thinking about this. I think what's going to tend to happen with these conversations is due to the situation, we're really going to, I don't know if I think this will work. Is this backwards or can you read this? Oh, getting your reflection. Look at that. You can read it. Okay. I'm going to try to find a spot that's not horribly. So practical, programmatic, and mission. Practical, programmatic, and mission. So here's what I want you to think about. Practical, programmatic, and mission. And what I mean by that is practical for the framework of our conversation. That's going to be like, think about CDC guidelines. So when it comes to us reentering, I want like the practical stuff is, okay, we're going to have hand sanitizers. And what if we're going to have people sit 6 feet apart? And what does that mean for bathroom policy? And like, that's practical stuff. That's the practical side of it. So that's like the guidelines. The programmatic stuff, look at my beautiful handwriting, look at your reflections, is the what we do. So program wise, that's like the actions that we take. So is it hosting services, Bible studies, small groups, large groups, classrooms, like the actual program of your ministry? We're going to classify those as program things. And then mission is who we are. It's what we're trying to do. It's who we're trying to create. It's why we do what we do. It's the, you know, to use a good old Robert Mulholland thing, it's like, it's who we be. It's the mission of what we're trying to do. It's not what we do, it's who we be. Now, here's what's going to be really interesting about this conversation. And so don't miss this, because here's what always happens in these conversations is we're going to have to fight. Okay. I'm going to get real passionate real quick here. We are going to have to fight more than ever in this season to keep mission at the center of our choices. Because what's going to happen is everyone is going to want to run to practical. How are we going to do what we do? How are we going to do small groups? How are we going to do classrooms? How are we going to do door greeting? How are we going to do check-in? How are we going to do nursery care? How are we going to keep social distancing with 3-year-olds when they've never distanced anything in their life because they're 3? How, like, that's the thing. We're all going to want to run to the practical. If we don't run to the practical, we're going to go, oh, I need to get right back to my program. I need to do what I've always done. Let's just get back to normal as quickly as we can. And then eventually 2 or 3 months after we're rolling, we'll go, are we actually accomplishing the mission? So here's the framework. And I don't care if we get into practical program stuff today, but here's the framework I want us to really consider is this is a time to really evaluate our mission of why we do what we do. Are we actually creating disciples? Are we actually mobilizing people? Is what we've always done actually accomplish the mission that we wanted it to take? Because we've had several weeks here where we're actually able to kind of step away and reevaluate a bit of what actually going back looks like. Because if we can start with that at the centerpiece, then allow that to inform what we feel like we need to do, then put that within the guidelines of what the government says is healthy behavior. If we do it the other way around, we run the risk of mission drift and looking up 6 months from now and have never actually evaluated anything that we're actually doing to go, is it actually accomplishing disciples making disciples and people being mobilized for the kingdom? So all that passionate sermon to say, as we're talking about all these conversations, yes, we're going to get into practical. Yes, we're going to get into programmatic. Yes, we're going to get into all those things. But I really, again, even if it's not this call, I want you to think about what you've been doing, because I think the reality is people are going to think we just got to get back to normal. And I just don't want us to miss the opportunity to go, is normal what we actually should get back to? And maybe it is. Maybe you're going to look at your models and how you go, yep, we were right then and we're right again. And that might be your conclusion. For some of us, it might be something in between. And so another framework I just want to share with you, and this isn't mine. This is from Carl Eastlack, one of our district superintendents. I think this is a really helpful framework. So if you got your pen, you can write these down. When it comes to restarting, some of us are just going to resume. And I mean, that's just like, we're just going to get back to what we've always done. We're just going to resume. So it's like a light switch type of a deal, right? So it's like, we're going to actually go to our building, flip the light switch on. We're going to have new CDC guideline stuff, but it's going to be pretty much the same thing. So some of us are just resuming. So for that, it's like the practical CDC stuff is really, really important in the conversation. Some of us, using Carl's framework, need to reset. And what we mean by reset is we're going to go back to our normal model, but yet it's going to be with a little bit of a twist, because we've learned something about our ministry during the pandemic. We've learned a little bit of like, hey, this was kind of a golden calf that we probably don't need to bring back. Or this is something that we've been doing that now that we've got some technology or some other things, it's just with a twist. So it's still the old way of doing things. And the old isn't necessarily bad. So hold on, but it's a little bit of a reset. So what is it that might be a little bit different that just needs, maybe a good word would be tweaks. You're tweaking what you're doing to better fill mission because you've learned some things, but yet it's still under the practical guidelines. So from using these frameworks, like reset might be more of like where we talk about programmatic shifts. It might be a little bit of programmatic shifts that we're working through. Another one of those pieces is maybe for some of us, we need to really just reimagine completely. Like it's like we've discovered some new normals. And so that's where that mission idea, I think, starts to come in of like, we're realizing and really being transparent that this is new frontier, and we really need to reimagine what we're doing and kind of really wrestle with our program and go, that really wasn't doing what I needed it to do. So I need to do something completely different. I need to reimagine what I'm doing so it's so completely different. And the other one is this, and I think a lot of us are going to feel this, especially with our younger people, is like, it's just a restart. Like, I've heard this said multiple times of like that everybody's a relaunch, everybody's relaunching, everybody's restarting. And the tension with that is I think there is some truth to that's going to feel that way. But we're also talking for the most part that we have a captive audience. We have our following, if you will, like to use like marketing terms. It's like our churches have their followings. So it's not a full restart, although our energy might feel that way. And I think anytime we're in a restart or a relaunch standpoint, I think we can learn some of this from our church planning folks, is we have to be able to sustain our energy and go, okay, when do we move from restarting to actually we're established again, to actually it takes a different energy to work out of establishment than it does to restart. And so just some framework things to help our conversation and those types of things. So sharing those two frameworks with you guys, like let's just open up the conversation. Like as you're hearing those things, like what jumps out to you, what are you thinking, what thoughts did that spark? Let's just have a more of a leadership conversation here for a few minutes of like, when you think about those frameworks of practical, programmatic, and mission, and then that framework of resume, restart, reimagine, and restart, what are some of the things that come to your mind? What are you thinking? What are you processing right now?
I gotta say, fuel helped me process what this is going to be, because I was going at it, man, what programs are we going to do? Like, what games can you play where you have to stay 6 feet apart? What do we go into, especially because I only have a month left. So I'm like doing half the Mr. Feeney World Tour of impart all my wisdom. and half setting up Travis, who's on the call here, to show, hey, he's an awesome human being. Just, don't burn him in the first week. And Robin, she was the first one, right?
The speaker?
Yeah.
Carrie.
Sorry, I always want to call her Robin for some reason. Sorry, I'm really distracted. My cat's trying to break the hamster out and eat it. I'm not even joking.
Dude,
Weird.
that's hilarious.
Anyways, but her whole thing about listening and healing is like, it completely turned my whole, okay, what's going on with our teens? Why are we having like our most dedicated teens going, they cannot function at all here? And I'm going, man, all right, we can start meeting, not this Sunday, the next Sunday, we can start having groups of 10. So we're going to start having really small youth groups and trying it out. And I'm like, you know what? We are just going to have fun. I'm going to have it laid back and fun. It's going to be like 10% anything really spiritual, just so we can focus on creating a healing environment where we can have conversations and just let go and basically go, there is what I'm seeing with my teens is there is not a point to go program heavy. Like last night, I had 3 or 4 things planned for youth group. We had 2 teens showed up, and it was, I think, a healthier youth group that we spent the whole time talking instead of doing anything. And it might not be the best plan in the universe, but I think it's a necessary plan, at least for the first month as we're settling in, just allowing them to decompress from what's going on and get back to a new normal. So that's where we're at right now.
Appreciate it.
It's going to be laid back.
Great.
We have over the summer, our programming changes. And so we go, once the end of May happens, we mostly just go into house parties and beach parties and worship on the waterfront, concerts, and just those kind of things. And so now I'm trying to figure out, like, my wife and I were just sitting here figuring out what is it going to look like, because we've already like separated. And so now we've got to figure out like that whole process of what it looks like. Are we going to go back to the house parties? Are we going to go back to, we don't think worship on the waterfront's going to happen, the concert, big things like that. But how do we, that's where we're processing on stuff.
Angie, I'm going to put you on the spot. Like, what things are you thinking right now? Because what's kind of thought process look like for you guys right now as you're processing reentry stuff?
I'd say a couple things that stick out. I think one is we're talking about how do we go back to physical campus while still keeping our social media presence, because I think a lot of our families are going to be ready to come back, but I think we're still going to have a huge portion that are not ready to come back. And so I think for a while, we're going to have to be dual in all things that we do. And I think we might have to stay that way. And I think also finding ways to care for people, because like he was saying, that he said like that decompression time. I think for kids and students, the way they process things like this takes time. And so whereas adults, things like this happen where emotionally we begin to process this, a lot of them have not processed any of this yet. And so they're going to come back to us this summer, then all of a sudden it's going to hit them. What I lost, what did I miss out on? And I think we're going to have to find a way to not only spiritually lead them closer to God, but also care for the wounds that they're going to us with. And so I think there's a couple things that we're talking about right now is how do we care for them deeply? And also how do we kind of find ways to meet families where they're at, whether it's at campus or it's still online.
That's good. Yeah. So I think you just said 2 really good things is the physical and the digital presence. Like this isn't a light switch where we're going to go, we've been doing digital and now we're physical. Like that's really wise. That's really, really wise. And the other thing that you said that clicked for me was this idea of healing these wounds and giving space for these wounds, because I think one thing we all have to realize, and I know some of us feel this differently. So for some of us who are more empathetic naturally, you're going to go like, yeah, I know this. But for some of us that might struggle with empathy, people have been worried and are going to continue to worry about their physical safety. Like if you want to, like, that is like, if you like, that's a big weight when you're worried about your physical safety. And like, even and just like, we have to be empathetic to that and realize that the leadership decisions that we're making is specifically that's where some of those practical things we were talking about. Some people, like Angie's saying, they're not going to come to our church because they're going to give it a couple weeks and evaluate if they think our church is physically safe. Forget soul safe, physically safe for them, which I think that's a really, that's helpful. That's helpful, Angie. Thank you. Somebody else, what things are you processing right now? Like what things are you thinking through? Even like that framework I was sharing earlier of the practical, programmatic, or mission.
I think for our youth group, we've got, half of our youth group, their parents come to church, they come to church on Sundays, and half don't. And so this past week, we took gift bags to everyone in our youth group. And some of the parents we've never really met before. Like, we recognize them, might say, hey, we see them in the grocery store, but don't have a relationship. Yeah. But after last week, like yesterday, dropped off a bag for someone, had an hour-long conversation with her and her parents that never before have I had like any relationship with. And so my wife and I, we've just been talking about like really trying to take advantage of that during the summer. Because I don't think they would send her back to youth group anytime soon, talking to them. But they would be totally up for us coming over, hanging out with her daughter, talking to them and stuff like that. So just trying to build these relationships, necessarily programmatic. I don't know when we'll be able to go back to our normal youth group, but take advantage of some of these missional things. Because if we want them to be spiritually healthy, we want their parents to be spiritually healthy as well. So trying to take advantage of these relationships that, people are craving relationship in a different way.
Good.
They have their normal. And so just trying to figure out how do we missionally take advantage of that opportunity right now. And it's going to look really different, but that's okay.
Yeah. And I think you just brought up a good point of like, that missional behavior is probably maybe not going to take place within the four walls of them coming to a Sunday service, right? Like which kind of piggybacks on what Angie was alluding to, of like, it's both this dance of physical and digital and connection. And Pauline, I think I just saw your comment in the chat. I've just had can you share a little bit about that conversation? Because I think it's just helpful. I saw it in the chat, but I'd love to just unpack that just a little bit, because I think it's helpful for us.
Well, I was talking to our lead pastor earlier today, and he was, we were talking about, as we come back together, what is this going to look like for the youth ministry? And so we're talking about the hybrid thing, as Angie has said, that's probably just going to be where we're going to be camping out. And primarily because there are a lot of families that may have an underlying medical condition that they're being concerned about and being very careful about. And there is this real hesitation where they've literally had a major lockdown, nobody in, nobody out, and being very, very careful. I mean, because let's just face it, I mean, there's no reason to take that risk. But until there's an actual vaccine available where they have that sense of guarantee that they're not going to contract COVID, even when small groups are going to be allowed, there's still that hesitation that this is not going to be someplace where they're going to send their kid. So that's something that we're taking in consideration. So we're going to have some sort of avenue to reach these families, respecting their concerns for the risk.
It's good.
On a practical side to this conversation too, I think we have to begin, as we talk to our leaders, we have to find kind of new leaders, because we're going to have leaders who lead our physical campuses, but then we're also going to have to recruit new leaders to lead this digital side of things and the care for kids who are stuck at home, and who's calling them and connecting with them. And so one of the things that we're talking about as a team is, as people are saying, like, I'm not ready to come back physically because I'm compromised, is helping them find a way to serve.
So good, Angie. And
so that's just kind of a practical side to it.
I think you bring up a good point too. Like our volunteer teams are probably going to look differently. And I think we all just even need to prepare our heart that some of the people that we might think have been like our go to there all the time, like things might be changing for them. And like, so where do we, to use a good Anita Eastlackism, like where do we find the yes for them? Like we want to be yes people of finding places for them to serve, finding places for them to connect, keeping them looped in, even though Travis, you're killing me, bro. That was a really funny comment. So but how do we care for these people and find their yes in the midst of these really, really hard things, to find their place? That's really great. That's good.
So one of the cool things that's kind of happened in our ministry is that this pandemic has forced us to end ministries that weren't working anyway, and to put greater emphasis on what's already essential and what's working and most important, and then launching new things to kind of fit in our current culture. And so I'm very excited. Our senior pastor and I were visiting after service yesterday after our live stream, and we were just dreaming about the future and how we may be able to end ministries that weren't working and no one will be upset because it's already gone, gone accustomed to it. And so this is really cool to just align our discipleship, our mission focus. And I like the word hybrid that someone used earlier, that we'll be able to do hybrid ministry. I'm really excited. One of the things that we're focusing on, though, is even if we don't have the plan figured out, to address and promote that we are working on a plan and that there is a plan coming together, because that seems to give people a degree of security to know that we're thinking things through. Even if we don't know every detail, there is a plan. That's great. And I want to encourage people, get the plan out early, even if you don't know all the details, because people need to know that you're thinking these things through.
So good. That's really wise, man. And again, I think it comes to one of those frameworks we talked about a few weeks ago of that internal dialogue versus external dialogue. Like what are those leadership conversations that I'm having internally? And then what of those internal conversations do I have to put before the people so that it stays in front of the people, so that, lack of communication is a vacuum. It's going to be filled with something. So our silence is going to be filled with something. And so, Nate, I appreciate both the things that you just said, man. That's good stuff. That's really good stuff.
Also, to the point of reevaluating things that have worked and things that are not working currently, and trying to figure out where do we shift so that way we are most effective. One of the things that we were talking about today was we have to actually consider that there's some families who are learning from the quarantine about how busy their lives were, and that perhaps moving forward, they're now having this conviction of, okay, we got to pull the e-brake on this a little bit and maybe not have our kids involved in every single sport and every single club. And maybe we don't go to this group and that group and do all these different things. So there are families that are having this conversation of their own family dynamics have changed because of this, and their moving forward is going to actually look different too. So perhaps, like you said, the volunteers and some service teams and others might look different just because they're downsizing on the busyness.
I think one of the things kind of along with that we've been trying to focus with our church is how can we empower people to actually, not just youth, but just church at large, empower people to be the church on their own, in their own context. Good. And I think that's something that we need to be really careful that, I guess, kind of going with that mission idea, that we're not abandoning that once we're able to be back in person. Because that's one of the things that I've been encouraged to see. Families are trying to figure out, how do I lead my family in worship when I am at home? And how do I lead a Bible study with my family? And it would be easy for us to, like I said, abandon that when we go back. So even thinking proactively, how can we incorporate some of those almost new skills that we're trying to teach them while we're separated, so that they can carry those on coming out of this time.
It's great. So good.
similar to what Pauline was sharing, I was talking to a pastor friend a couple weeks ago as he was thinking through that reentry idea. And it's basically the same thought, is that challenging parents, what are you not going to add back into your life when we go back? So this pastor was expressing how freeing it's been to be able to call up families and be like, I know they're home, so I'm going to call them and talk to them, and to be able to make time. And he's not intruding on soccer schedules, basketball schedules, dance schedules, gymnastic schedules, you name it. There's 20 other, activities you can name. And so I've kind of filed that away mentally, because I want to remember that when we do start ramping back up, to kind of bring that back to parents and challenge them. What are you've done fine without for this, whatever, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, you've done fine without it. So what are you not going to add back into your life now? What busyness are you not going to let creep back in this coming season? I think I found that to be a really compelling idea.
It's great.
I've weirdly had a lot of conversations, at least at the high school level. My elementary parents are jiving with that. Let's make life simpler. But my high school parents have actually said, man, this was a shakeup. I need to add more to my team's schedule so that they're making up for what they missed. The teens are echoing it too, that they want more added to their schedule. I'm like, you guys are insane. You just were given rest and you want to double what you had before that was killing you.
Right.
And yeah, that's been a fun, you're kind of talking to a wall conversation I keep having.
I think you're bringing up a good point, though, because what people are trying to do when they're doing that is deal with loss. And so, like, there is a reality that we need to help shepherd people through that process of loss, because taking one thing and replacing it for another, that's a coping mechanism to deal with loss. And so I've heard a few of those similar comments, Matthew, of like, I can't wait for things to get open back up so that we can, fill in the blank with whatever that family's value is. But yeah, I've heard similar things with that too. But I think it goes back to, go ahead, Dave. You got something?
But thinking about loss, I don't know what your teens experienced, but for me, I distinctly remember the night on Zoom. It was like 2 or 3 weeks into the lockdown, probably the week that school was canceled for the rest of the year. That was the moment for a lot of my teens that the loss and mourning hit, because they just lost their track season, and they just lost their dance recital, and they just lost their musical that they were working on. And that's when they realized, oh, I'm not on vacation from school anymore. I just lost this. And it became real. Went from celebrating I'm off of school to they were really sad. Like, I had these sophomore boys who, I think of as kind of kids that would screw around in school, and they're like, I'm really missing school. I'm really sad it's over now. And that was really, I think, unexpected for me. I was like, oh, these guys are in mourning all of a sudden for something they were celebrating last week being off school, and now they're all in mourning. And it's really curious.
It's good.
One of the things, Zach, I was Zooming with a couple of pastors the other day too, in prep for a intro to ministry class. And the one thing they expressed was that in pastoral ministry becomes our identity. And now all of a sudden, which is unhealthy. So when things are going well in our ministry, we're doing well. When things are going bad in our ministry, we're doing bad. And so somehow we become codependent with ministry as pastors, so that however it's going depends and dictates how we personally are doing. So now that there's this massive loss, there's a lot of internal dilemma and struggle, because I've lost my identity. And maybe all along this was the combination, or culmination of what all the pastors said, but maybe this was the time to refocus our identity, the fact that's in Jesus Christ, not in how well we do or how well we perform, even though we know that we have to do these things and we love being active with other people. But our identity is not wrapped up in our ministry. We can't be codependent on that. We have to be codependent or completely dependent on Jesus Christ and let our identity be found in him, which is a hard lesson for me. And then when we brought it up to all the freshmen in ministry class, I actually had Zach Matchett come in and talk about that, because he was on that call, and it was heart-wrenching for Zach and I, but I think the students were still kind of like a little bit wide-eyed and like, I'm not for sure what you're talking about. But after you've instantly had that hard stop that now we can't do what we know to do, it causes us to rethink who we are actually.
Absolutely.
Mm.
It's good. And I think we all have to be honest with ourselves and piggyback on what Charlie's saying is not only is it going to speak to us, but it will eventually demand something new from us as well. Like the toolbox that we've always used probably has some tools that we need to throw away, probably has some tools that need brushed off and cleaned up, and probably has hopefully some new tools that we can put in our toolbox so that we're not just leaning into identity, but it's gonna demand something different from us.
Well, I think that's a great point that we need to remember for our students as well, is whatever it is that was defining their identity that they've lost, and trying to find, I guess my mind is thinking of, okay, what are those things that we're all pulling out of this time together that we can use to launch off of, in some ways building connections that we didn't necessarily have with our students. Like, I've never been a middle school boy, but I've experienced loss and identity shifting during this time. So I guess thinking of how we can counsel and guide and lead students through their own reshaping identities, but launch off of that to use that as a way to turn around and point them back to your identity needs to be in Christ, and you've seen firsthand why.
It's great.
And there's some weird identity parts for our students. Like, I don't know if you guys got to see this one. I had like at least 6 teens that are regularly bullied. And one of the weird first comments that came out of them once this started was they said they missed being bullied and they missed the bully. That has deep psychological ramifications as their identity issues are going to start reforming. Like, I can't even fathom what that's going to mean. And it can't just be my 6 students that had that reaction. I'm guessing pretty much every student that was bullied. It wasn't, oh, I can breathe a relief, I got this release from them. It's going to be, now they're dealing with the fact my identity was being bullied. And we'll have to start dealing with that and nursing them out of it. And man, I know I've joked before on our Zoom calls that I deal with some of the messed up kids that there are in the world, and teens have way more issues than when I started youth ministry 15 years ago. But man, that was a sobering, that's messed up. That their identity was, I need to be bullied.
We've talked a lot about grief so far, and if you, I just threw in a really simple resource into the chat, which are the 5 stages of grief and some of what those other emotions look like. If you've ever been through counseling or something like that, you've seen this before. This isn't anything, but I think it's helpful as we're working with this loss to have this kind of framework in mind of like, I mean, now obviously we're smart. We're not going to look at a kid or look at a student and go, I think you're in the depression phase of the 5 phases of grief, right? Like, that's like horrible leadership and terrible pastoral care. But I think it is a helpful tool as we're trying to think through helping people work through grief and the reality of that. Ashley, I've seen you unmute a couple times.
I was just going to type it. It's all good. So we are working through kind of this hybrid thing that everyone's talking about, because families, especially when e-learning ends, they're going to be looking for something for their children. So what can we do to provide this online resource for the families that are afraid or compromised to where they cannot come inside the walls of the church yet? And how can we also provide something for the kids that are coming in? And how do we do it on a smaller scale to follow CDC protocols? And so that's kind of our mindset, but also we want to make sure that mission is shared in a way so families know and recognize that Christ does need to be at the center of their lives once they start filling their schedules back up again. How does church become more important than all of the other programs that they've previously filled their lives up with?
It's great. It's really good. So from a practical standpoint too, in the chat, if you haven't looked through this PDF, I would definitely recommend you looking through it. It's the whitehouse.gov PDF of opening the guidelines for opening up America again. And so it goes into some pretty good detail of what the 3 phases are. And so I think part of it that we just have to realize as ministry leaders is that we do carry a responsibility to be in the know on this stuff. And I think one thing that's been really interesting to me, and it's not a bad thing, it's just something I observed, is, some people are very like, they want to know what's going on in the news. They want to know what the government's suggesting. They're like all in, like they want to learn and all this stuff. And then there's some people in the squishy middle that are like, yeah, if it's convenient, I'll look at it. If not, and then there's some people that are kind of like, denial's not the right word, uninterested, maybe kind of a wait and see. But I would just encourage all of us, and again, guidelines are changing almost all the time. This one stayed a little bit more consistent for a little bit now. But just for you, as you're thinking about some of those practical implications of reentry, what reentry could potentially look like, these phases are what the government is saying reentry could potentially look like. Now, how the United States works is we know that it's left up to states and local government for some of these things. And so, although these are the federal level, your state might have different stipulations and guidelines on that practical level. But I think it's helpful for those of us who haven't taken a look at this PDF yet to really not just glance through it, but to really look at that, because when it comes to our physical locations, I think we're really going to have to wrestle with what does that safety tier, what does that physical safety tier look like, so that people do feel safe to come back into our building. And we all know this is, we need to get it mostly right the first time too, and that's not a fear-based statement. That's not, I think the school systems are dealing with that. I think businesses are we all with some of the physical practical things, we just need to do our best to get it right the first time. And then obviously we'll adjust if we haven't gotten something right. But I think that's a helpful PDF to continue to process through this as well. Awesome. Anybody else? I don't want to cut us off. Any other things you're thinking right now?
Hey, Zach, before this, I emailed you some, I think I found online. It was just really good tips for the basic necessity thing of cleaning guidelines or things to consider.
I see this email.
It's kind of an easy way to share it with everybody, but a lot of the work is well done.
Cool.
So I'm taking that and just readjusting it for our situation, but it's just, I saw it as a great resource.
Is it shareable, that email? Or is it?
Be.
Okay,
yes,
cool.
Because it was I saw it on a Facebook page, so yeah. And it's a Word document, so it's editable.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool. Well, we'll take a look at that, and maybe we can, Kristen, I'm going to forward this to you real quick so that you can help me edit it and do a once over on it. And then we'll see, because thanks for sending that, Angie. That's super awesome. Because if we can put that together as a resource, we'll post that thing, get it going. It's awesome. Charlie, you had shared some things last week of your Indiana Wesleyan's still bringing their teams in, and do you have any where are you guys at in that process? What are you guys thinking now with summer, with some of this reentry stuff?
Yeah, actually tomorrow's a pretty big day. We go live with our Never Too Young to Middle School conference. Friday night, the live stream. We're still bringing in Sing Love to do live worship from the studio. And so that's going to be a nice event. Matt from Saddleback is joining us. So we have Cypress from Ohio. We got Saddleback out in California. We got Southland down in Kentucky. And last year we had about 118 churches that joined that were a part of Never Too Young. Anybody can be a part of it. That model is part of a 3-tier plan we're going to start promoting here pretty quick, where we're going to use all of our resources for free to the church. So for example, we have the studio. if a church or a district or a camp wants to do a live stream event, we can run it through our studio for free for them. We have the platform, all the cameras, for example, like talking to a person. I mean, I don't know if I should bring up their name yet, but we're going to use our worship band and everything else and sing, air rally, do a pre-event at 7 o'clock. They're recording, they're coming in with their own speaker and with students from their district. And we'll use our resources to be able to stream live events for anybody at any time, at any place.
Wow.
And so we're looking forward to right now doing at least 8 of those in June.
Wow.
For a church, an individual church or a district. And so we have the platform, we have the people, we have the cameras, and all we got to do is now partner with the local church or the district, which we can do, because if we can bring in, Hillsong into Fusion, we can definitely bring in anybody, locally, what I mean, continental United States by planning. So we built a platform for it.
Cool.
And now all we got to do is just use it. So that's our tier 1, is to offer any of these live stream platforms to anybody who wants it, and it costs them absolutely nothing. So, for example, if a church or district decides to do that, they promote it, they run it,
Wow.
and then we'll build it for them and with them. And so all of a sudden, it can go live. For example, we found for Fusion, we had 4 different countries and 38 states join, and so we know this will work. And again, we're doing a little bit more of a interactive version for Never Too Young. So that will be a different one to look at. And I'll put that link up as well after it's done Friday night. But and you can look at the link right now. I mean, Cham, you could throw it up there right now, actually, in the chat. So we have the live stream. The second thing that we put into play is we're bringing all of our students to the campus in a very methodical way. So this has gone through all through risk management, so that the moment something does happen and the need arises, we have the virtual version. We have the one-day event where we can load our gear, all of our archery tag, all of our sound lights, all of our bands, 2 different bands, like a party band and a worship band, come to a location anywhere in the continental United States and do a one-day event where there's no overnight stays required at all. Wow. And partner with that local church or that district to do a live one-day event if it's permitted within the context of those CDC guidelines, which I think it will be on certain situations. But and these don't have to be mega events either.
Right.
These have to be thousands. And then the last tier is if something, if things were to go very well and a camp or a church organization says, hey, we're going to do an abbreviated 2-3 day camp, or maybe even a week long, and it's completely legitimate within the CDC guidelines, then our teams will be flexible to go.
Yeah.
And so we're keeping all of our teams, all 6 of them, on campus to be flexible to help support online, one day, and whatever the next may be. And we're also like doing our examine program, which is credit to students. And so whether that's on site or online, we're doing that as well. And so, and
if people want that information, where can they get it? Like if they're like, hey, I want to potentially do that, how do they?
We will put it up as soon as I get the final clearance. We'll put it up on this webpage, and then on our webpage at endwest.edu/youth ministry. I think like, I don't know if Shammy, you can throw that up there as well, like, or you email us, you'll see it posted there as well.
Okay.
But we went through every step, and so the live stream stuff is good to go.
Cool.
The one-day stuff is in most contexts still pretty good, but the key thing is this: I mean, this has been 30 years of youth ministry building. Like when I was at Skyline, it's like one of my favorite things to do was to go down to Coronado and watch the Navy SEALs train, and you could sit there and you could watch them do crazy stuff. And I feel like the flexibility, everything that you said, Zach, is exactly what they do. They're cautious, they're planning, they're safe, but they're prepared. Mm-hmm. And so, and it's ministry to the church. So there is no cost. There's not a fee whatsoever. There's not even a travel fee. If we're driving someplace and all the production and everything else, there's no fee. This has always been ministry to students. And so all of our resources this summer are being made available to the church, to districts, or whoever, whenever the time arises. We're flex all June, all July, and even possibly some portions of August.
Wow. Dude, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's
You got it, man.
amazing. So
yeah,
cool.
and I think about what Ashley Lee just said. That's the budget thing. When I had this conversation with the president in a private conversation, we talked about how the church, right now doesn't have those extra resources to drop in, and why can't we be a support? And of course, he was 100% behind it.
Wow.
And so real positive stuff to help out wherever we can.
It's so good, dude. Thanks for sharing all that. That's
no problem, man.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah. Okay. So I want to make sure I honor everybody's time. Next Monday, we'll do round 2 of summer events. Because for those of you who are on, a couple weeks ago, we said everybody had this like, what's going to happen the first week of May, and so that's next week. So we'll jump on a call next week to talk about summer events. If connecting with Charlie and Shane may be helpful, please do that. As we're continuing to talk about all this reentry stuff, again, this is one conversation of a bunch that we're going to continue to have. Angie, again, thanks for sending all that stuff over. If anybody else is seeing any of this resource stuff that you're like, hey, I think I can share this broadly, or even if you're like, dude, Zach, you just need to see it, please send it to me so that we can continue to curate those things and get those out to people. It's been a huge help. We've added 403 people to our Facebook group in the last 6 weeks because people are just hungry for connection and hungry for this stuff. So there's almost 1,100 people in that group now, and it's all people that, people are engaging like crazy. So that's because of calls like this and that you guys are doing this, and we're all sharing and growing together. And so thank you for being who you are and being so kingdom minded. If there are other things that continue to come up, that you're like, again, because some of you, several of you have emailed me offline going, hey, do you know about this? Or can you think about this? Or what, can we talk about this idea? Like, please continue to send me those things, because it's very, very helpful as Kristen and I are trying to stay, a week or two ahead of like where everybody's at. Like, I just want to continue to let these calls be encouraging and be collaborative. And we're going to close down here in prayer just to continue to ask God to move. And I'll share this word with us before we close in prayer. It hit me, Greg shared in Fuel last week that intercessory prayer is the manual labor of prayer. And that hit me a little bit differently this weekend. I was outside in my back field. We've got probably, I need to actually count, but it's about 60, I think, apple trees in my back field. And they've been around they're old apple trees. Some of them have been in the ground for 30 or 40 years. They're huge apple trees. And so maintaining those trees takes a lot of manual labor. I was in the orchard for 6 hours on Saturday running the saw, just cleaning out the dead stuff and picking up the brush and all those types of things. And as we're getting ready and as we're continuing in this process of quarantining and thinking about reentry, I wonder what it would look like for each of us to pick something, a dream, pick something you're wanting to see happen in your ministry, pick a family member. Like, what is that thing? What is that objective? What is that dream? What is that longing that you have that you can go before the Lord and just labor with him in prayer? Not just pray in passing, not just but really, what is that thing? And it might be personal for you. It might have to do with your job. It might have to do with your family. It might have to do with finance. Might have to do with healing. What that thing is. But what does it look like for you in this new season to really become this person who labors and fights in prayer? Not just prayer in passing, but prayer laboring and just begging God to do it, begging God to do something. And again, maybe that's something for you. Maybe that's a dream that you have that you feel like the Lord's given you. Maybe that's something that you're dreaming for your students. Maybe that's something you're dreaming for your family. Like, what is that thing that you're just going, okay, Lord, like, I'm going to go take my saw out into the apple tree and start cutting stuff down and burning stuff up and just labor over it. I don't know what that is for you, but I just want to encourage you to really sit before the Lord and just not pray in passing, but pray, be this person who labors, because prayer has an incredible, and we teach this stuff all the time. And I know you teach this stuff all the time, but I want you to hear my heart differently today. I want you to hear my heart is when we pray, our thoughts, our words, and our actions tend to change when we're praying. And I wonder what it would look like for you to allow the Lord to do that in your life today. Can I pray for you? Would that be okay? I'd love to be able to do that. I'm glad you said yes, because you're on the call. So it's, I guess you could leave, right? You're like, nope, I'm out. That'd be awesome. Let me pray for you. Jesus, I thank you for my friends. I thank you for who they are. I thank you for how you've wired them, God. I thank you for how they're laboring for you, God. They're plowing ground, God. They're doing the kingdom labor, Father. And I just pray, Lord, that you would give them fresh vision, fresh insight, fresh encouragement, a fresh dose of your Holy Spirit, God, to give them a little bit different, just a deeper strength to stand. God, that you would literally gird up their legs with strength to be able to stand in this new season. God, would you even, maybe somebody even on this call, God, they're not even sure what that dream or that vision or that perspective would be that they would live. God, would you meet them uniquely with what it is that you would have that they could stand in agreement with? Would you come to them in a dream, a vision, a journaling session, a word from a friend, a thought, God, and just deposit something fresh in them that they can labor with you? And so, Father, we just pray a unique blessing as we're trying to parent now and be husbands and wives and be single and trying to figure out what all this looks like in this new season. God, help us in this season to know how to pastor well. Give us what we need practically. Give us what we need programmatically. And God, desperately, God, help us stay on the mission of your kingdom. And so, Father, I pray a blessing on my friends. I love them. I'm so grateful for them, and just thank you. And I just ask your presence to just wreck them today. It's your name. Amen and amen.